Hey, Dog Nation, I'm Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Meriwether and Tharp. Hope your Thursday's gotten off to a great start. We got a fun show for you coming up. Terrence Edwards stopping by. We'll recap G-Day with him. A lot of thoughts he's already expressed on that. We'll get some more involving the receivers that are, kind of on display there and everything else from the G-Day scrimmage from Saturday. Of course, Terrence being a former receiver, he's got a lot of opinions on that position group, but he'll share even more of that with us here today. Interesting news about a former dog we'll get into before the show is done. And off the top of the very program today, there is a specific advantage that I think Georgia should have versus Clemson. Now, we'll see if it actually looks that way when these two teams get together in September, but a specific advantage that Georgia should have versus Clemson, that could be the key to the victory in that big time, much hyped season opener. Will begin that way. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Meriwether and Tharp, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Meriwether and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I grew up as kind of a child of the 90s, and when I think about that era of kind of like, mid-90s, early 90s when I was in high school, one of the things that comes to mind for me is like the Sports Center back then. ESPN Sports Center was like just the heyday of Sports Center. It's much better, frankly, then than it is now, to be completely honest with you. But you, a lot of you who are my age, or you kind of seen the old footage of that kind of stuff, you know how great it was, and kind of the age in which those Sports Center hosts were kind of just first getting famous. And one of the things they used to do at the end of every one of those Sports Centers back then, I'm not sure if they still do it now, but they would do a "Did you know?" It was kind of a fun fact at the end of every show, and it was, hey, did you know? And they kind of gave you some information that in many cases you might not be aware of, and it might be a fact or a stat or something along those lines that you would go on to tell somebody else later on that day. Well, here's my own "Did you know?" to start our program here today, DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. Did you know that Clemson, the team that Georgia's going to open the 2021 season with, ranks very low on a list that kind of matters? There is ESPN's Bill Connelly, who does a lot of stat work, things like that. One of the things he does yearly is his returning production. What percentage of your stats do you bring back? Frankly, returning production percentages probably a more accurate reflection of how you're going to perform on the field than just, say, returning starters, because when teams are subbing in and out so much, starters alone is kind of a sort of a quaint term, more an antiquated term than the actual just percentage of production that's out there. Well, here's the "Did you know?" If we're to rate teams on the basis of how much percentage of last year's stats do you bring back for this upcoming year, on the offensive side of the ball, Clemson ranks very low. According to ESPN's Bill Connelly, just 118th in the country in 2021 on returning offensive production from the previous year. Now, they are very high on defense. They're like third returning production on defense, but we'll push that aside at the moment and just focus on the offensive side of the ball. 118th in the country in returning production for the upcoming year, according to ESPN's Bill Connelly. Now, I think that's really interesting for a couple of reasons. First of all, it reminds me of something I try to say on this show quite a bit. We are obsessed with Georgia football. We do DawgNation Daily every single day. Many of you, with the reason we do the show is because you want Georgia football conversation each and every day. We fixate on all the small details related to this program. And so therefore, the things that are not quite perfect with Georgia, we have a tendency to at times maybe blow those up, make them bigger than they actually are. Because, as I've told you before, if we were doing a daily show for the other so-called national championship contenders, the Bamas, the Ohio States, the Clemsons, the others, you would find issues on those rosters as well. The Georgia issues to the typical Georgia fan just seem more significant because he or she pays a lot more attention to them. But Clemson's got its own problems. Ohio State's got its own problems. Alabama, Oklahoma, all the perennial contenders, they all have their own problems. You better believe it. Clemson right now, to the extent that they have kind of a media sphere around that program, there is a discussion going on of how do you replace all the big names that are no longer here. Trevor Lawrence is about to be the number 1 overall pick in the upcoming NFL draft. Now, do DJ Uyunglele is backup, has played before. We've seen him play well, but much less experience than obviously Trevor Lawrence was, who had been at the helm there for a few years. Travis Etienne is no longer with that program. There are veteran, running backs like, Lynn J. Dixon, but frankly, Dixon probably didn't have as great a year last year as he had, prior to that there at Clemson. Of course, Will Shipley's a hotshot freshman, and a lot of folks are looking for big things from him, but that's another big name in Etienne that isn't there anymore. Now, it's also fair to say that Justin Ross, a wide receiver, coming back after having been away from the team, we don't quite know what he brings to the table, and their freshmen, guys like Bo Collins who are expected to sort of step in there, but once again, there is kind of a lack of experience across the board for Clemson at some of the key offensive playmaking type positions, at least on the basis of returning production from the 2020 team that comes back from 2021. Now, the next reason why this matters to me is because when Georgia plays Clemson to start the season, and we've said before, this is a huge game. It's more than just fun. I think the stakes for Georgia in this game are actually a little bit higher than some people have kind of assumed they are. This is a game that Georgia needs to win. And if you're looking for reasons why that Georgia could win this game, potential advantages that Georgia needs to and should exploit to get the victory in this game, I don't think you look any further than the potential mismatch in terms of the experience that Georgia hopefully brings into this game in comparison to the relative inexperience that Clemson will bring here. This ought to be an advantage that Georgia can take advantage of as a way of hopefully getting that victory in week one against Clemson. Let me kind of give you some stuff to kind of back this up. And by the way, I say this knowing full well that George Pickens likely will not be playing in this game after tearing his ACL, back during the spring, or at least suffering an ACL injury back during the spring. Even with that, Georgia still ought to be, you hope, the more experienced team. It ought to look like the more experienced team. It ought to play like the more experienced team. That ought to be an advantage that you hope Georgia can exploit there against Clemson. Let me give you an example from Kirby Smart. So Smart was talking about JT Daniels in his press conference after UGA on Saturday, specifically being asked, how does it feel to have a guy that started for you at the quarterback position at the end of last season, going through spring practice now, and really setting up to be a lot more solidified at that position this year than maybe Georgia was to certainly begin the 2020 season. And I want you to listen to this clip I'm about to play from Kirby Smart. There is one word that Kirby Smart uses twice when discussing JT Daniels and the Georgia offense, and this word to me ought to make a big difference season opener against Clemson. If Georgia's going to win the game, it's going to have to. This is Kirby Smart.
He's got command of the offense. He's got to be able to utilize the pocket, and we work on that each and every day. I know Coach Munkin is always driving that home with him, his ability to move in the pocket, step up. The offensive line's got to protect him and give him an opportunity. There were some times today that there were four-man rushes, and we got some pressure, and guys got pushed back into him. And I think that's important to allow him to step up in the pocket and move around and make plays down the field. But he has command of it. He understands it. The key is his decision-making process. We know the quarterback position, there's probably a decision has to be made every single play, and he manages that really well for us.
Did you hear the word that Kirby Smart used there twice? I heard the word command. Yeah, JT Daniels has command of the Georgia offense. There at the end of the clip, Smart once again circling back to the idea that Daniels is in command. There are decisions to be made on every play, and we trust JT Daniels to make those decisions. Now, you also heard Kirby talking about, the need to protect JT Daniels and the need for Daniels to protect himself by being able to move around. We understand all of that, but it's command. When Kirby looks at Daniels, he sees someone who's in control of what's happening on the field. I think that's incredibly valuable, and to our own eyes, that's the way that Daniels ought to look in the season opener against Clemson. Let's face it, DJ Uyunglele is an elite talent, much the same way that JT Daniels is. This is one of the most highly, I think, anticipated quarterback battles of the year. You've got Derek King against Bryce Young, things like that, early in the season as well. But these two quarterbacks, the two initial quarterbacks, JT versus DJ, this is going to be a big-time quarterback matchup. And I don't think it's kind of getting out in front of the skis too much to say that Georgia's best chance of beating Clemson is to have Daniels outplay Uyunglele in that game. And the best tool that I would say that JT Daniels has in his arsenal in comparison to DJ Uiagalelei is the fact that Daniels does have more playing experience. That experience ought to show up in the form of poise against Clemson in week 1. And it ought to show up in the form of, as Kirby Smart said, just command to make good decisions, to take advantage of whatever Clemson shows you on defense, to go back through the resources of your mind and find some way to sort of throw it where they ain't against the Tigers there that day. That experience ought to matter. But that's not the only place where Georgia potentially has that experience against Clemson. When JT spoke on Saturday after the game, one of the things he talked about was some of the check down throws that he made on G-Day. A lot of that to Georgia running backs. I think there were 4 Georgia running backs that had 5 or more catches in G-Day on Saturday. Of course, younger guys like Kendall Milton and Dejon Edwards were involved in that, but James Cook was involved in that as well. We expect him to be catching passes. That's kind of what he does well. We saw more of that from Zamir White than we're used to on Saturday, but he was also a big part of that passing game. And when Daniels was asked about that, he also gave a really interesting answer of, why was it that on Saturday that he was content to throw to those guys as much as he was, once again leaning on some of the experience that Georgia has at the running back position. This is JT Daniels.
I love throwing the ball deep, and you see it a lot, but especially when you have James, Zamir, Kendall, all the guys we have. I think check downs in general are the most underrated, underappreciated aspect of our offense. At a bare minimum, it's easy to throw. At a bare minimum, it's 3 yards, and that's if the first guy tackles them. It's very, very rare that the first guy tackles any of our running backs. So, if a defense wants to bring vertical pressure and drop back and play soft, or they're playing good coverage, if I have to check down 10 times in a row, I'll check it down 10 times in a row. There's no, there's no problem with that for me.
I love JT Daniels right there saying, listen, I'm going to put the ball in the hand of my running backs, in many cases experienced running backs, guys like Zamir White and James Cook, and I'm going to give them an opportunity to make a man miss. It's at least 3 yards. They make a man miss, something they do very frequently. It's even more yardage than that, and that's something else that I think that Georgia can really lean on against Clemson. Playmaking, experienced running backs in the running game, probably more than you saw on Saturday for G-Day, but still in the passing game there as well, looking to make plays. JT Daniels looking to be a catalyst for the Georgia offense, getting the wide receivers involved there as well. This is a razor-thin game between Georgia and Clemson. At least the numbers would kind of suggest that. Any advantage that you can exploit potentially matters. An advantage that Georgia ought to be able to exploit, at least you'd hope if you're a UGA fan looking to see that team get a victory, is the fact that Georgia in some spots has more experience than what Clemson's going to bring back offensively here. It's the kind of thing that could matter, and frankly, for Georgia's sake, you hope that it does. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. Good to have you with us, no matter how you get to us today. Live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. We're on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and we are available as a podcast wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Great to have you as a part of the program here today. It's Terrence Edwards coming up in a little bit. Can't wait to speak to him. Also, big thanks to our friends at Merriweather and Tharp for making it all possible. They're your source for Georgia divorce. Let me tell you what that means and why that matters. Because in an audience the size of ours, just the basic statistics tell us that a lot of you have either dealt with this before, I'm talking about the subject of divorce, or you may find yourself in a situation where you are about to deal with that. And it's really that group of folks I want to speak to right now. If you are about to go through this, if you have just determined that's an unavoidable conclusion for you as a part of your story here is what I can tell you to make you eventually feel better throughout all this process. When you put someone who's been through this thousands of times before to work for you, when you put your trust in a company like Merriweather and Tharp, which also takes great care and shows great concern for the clients that they go to work for, you are eventually going to be put on a path to be made whole again. Finances, family relationship, everything else that goes along with that. They can help lead you down that path. They'll take so many steps for you as they do, but the first step belongs to you. Reach out for that initial consultation. Find out about how they can get to work for you very quickly on all of that. Take that first step by finding them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com. That's theatlantadivorceteam.com. And while you're there, take advantage of free resources, blog posts, podcasts, things like that to help educate you with maybe even the right questions to ask when you do go through that initial consultation. I find my friends at Merriweather and Tharp today today, theatlantadivorceteam.com. Terrence Edwards here in a moment as promised. Before that, though, let's go around the doghouse here just for a brief moment. And speaking of the idea of experience, something we spent a good bit of time talking about when it came to starting the show here today, when Cole Kublik, SEC Network analyst, was on with Mike Griffith this week on his On the Beat show on the DawgNation video channels, in Cole evaluating what he's also seen from the Georgia offense. The word experience kind of came up there again with him in that discussion. I think this is really interesting from Cole about kind of how you navigate some of the offensive line concerns you might have and some of those other things that Georgia might be dealing with. For an offense that Cole likes, he still thinks experience matters. This is Cole Kublik.
I think it's going to be a fantastic offense. I think it's going to be a fascinating watch because I think that there will be micro areas of growth throughout the course of the season. I think the first one to watch will be the offensive line. I'm not necessarily sold on the first offensive line that you get will be the offensive line that starts the majority of the games, because I think there are some younger guys that are going to have a chance to play their way in. And also I think, too, when you have maybe some continuity and chemistry issues, you just lean towards experience, because that will get you out of trouble more times than maybe talent will.
Isn't that interesting to hear Cole Kublik say right there what we spent a good bit of time talking about at the top of the program, that as you're going through these issues, and let's make no mistake about it, Georgia is going to have some questions related to that offensive line. And as I've said on this show a few times, if you're in any way deficient on your offensive line because the Clemson defensive front is so good to start the year, then an unanswered question at left tackle could get you beat. I mean, that's just a fact in that season opener there. But I love what Cole Kublik says. While you're figuring that out, lean on that experience that you do have. Fortunately for Georgia along its offensive line, they do have some guys that have started a good number of games. Lean on those guys to work your way through it. Now, for what it's worth, Clemson's also dealing with a left tackle question itself right now, trying to figure that out to go along with 4 returning starters in the offensive line. But interesting to hear Cole Kublik say, hey, while you're figuring things out in the early going, which means week 1 against Clemson, the experience you do have could matter. One more from Cole here, with Mike Griffith from On the Beat after having seen Georgia at G-Day on the SEC Network. Cole really laying it out, the fact that he thinks this Georgia offense is going to be good, and he is unmistakable for what he believes this group's ultimate mission really is. And I think this certainly echoes a lot of what we said in the past. Take a listen to this.
I think there's enough talent across the board in that receiver room to be able to get away with everything they need to be a successful offense. This group's going to be balanced, but I think the number one goal for them going into this year is create more explosive plays. Well, you look at some of the tight ends, you look at some of the running backs, some of the other wide receivers, there's going to be enough guys around to be able to help create those explosive plays. And what they're going to be able to do with alignment and mismatches physically, I think is going to help them be able to create the things that they want to create. I wouldn't be surprised if they go a little bit faster at times this year. And then plain and simple, you got a quarterback that can stretch the field. And that's the reality of it.
Elsewhere in that same interview, Cole did talk about the fact that he thinks that George Pickens will eventually return for Georgia this upcoming season, more likely than not, I believe is what Cole said. You can check out the full interview to see that. But in that particular clip, what I find to be interesting, and this also echoes some of the things that we've said, is that even after the George Pickens injury, which obviously was a huge deal for Georgia near the beginning of spring practice, after G-Day, now that spring practice is concluded, you don't really hear much in the way of SEC Network analyst or national sports writer or anything along those lines. You don't really hear much in the way of, well, I guess that does it for Georgia. I guess they're no longer championship contenders because George Pickens hurt his knee. Now, it's a serious injury, and obviously those of us who like Pickens want to see him back playing again. But in terms of ending UGA's championship chances, guys like Cole Kublik, who saw Georgia behind closed doors leading up to G-Day and obviously from the field there on Saturday, they're not really saying that, which I think ought to also impact the way that Georgia fans view this upcoming season, even in light of the Pickens injury. That is Around the Doghouse. Before I get our buddy Terrence Edwards, and we also remind you about my friends at Event Buzz Media. One of the things I'm always so proud of, all the small business owners that kind of are a part of what we do each and every day here on our program, DawgNation Daily. And one of the things I love are small businesses that help other small businesses. In this case, that's what Event Buzz Media does. They specialize in high-impact video. It can boost your social media presence. And, for those people who want to get a big message out there, I think one of the things that we've learned around here is there's really no better way to do that than through the power of video. They've got a nationwide experience to incorporate events, training videos, stuff for YouTube, also even like short film production, things like that, whether it be music, sports, everything else. They can help tell your story through a video. And the great news is it's owned and operated, Event Buzz Media is, by an avid DawgNation reader, DawgNation Daily viewer, and a multi-time Golden Shoe winner. We're talking about a real DawgNation type guy here. It's our buddy Ben Green. You can call him up. He'll talk some dogs with you, but most importantly, he'll tell you how that Event Buzz Media and their video production skills can be put to use for you, for whatever your product, event, service, whatever it is. They can do big things for you. If you're watching on video, you can see how to get in touch, but I'll read it for everybody here. It's eventbuzzmedia.com. That's eventbuzzmedia.com, or give them a call, 423-667-0555. Once again, 423-667-0555. There is big news involving a former dog that we'll get to before we're done today. But for now, on everything that we saw Saturday from G-Day, from a guy whose opinion obviously matters, the former Georgia wide receiving great, Terrence Edwards, here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
I had the great pleasure of speaking to Terrence Edwards on Saturday about G-Day from our position there as a part of the DawgNation postgame show. So much fun to have been able to do that, but many of you have not heard a lot of Terrence's thoughts, so it's a great chance for us to do that right now. I guess, Terrence, let me sort of start big picture here, and then we'll kind of drill down on more of the specific details. You saw G-Day on Saturday. What did you think overall of the show that Georgia put on display there to close out spring practice?
I think offensively, I was just listening to you earlier, I think the Georgia offense now is definitely more than George Pickens a bust. I think the nation had opportunity to see the weapons that Kirby has assembled so far. Darnell Washington, I think, is going to be a star. And I don't take this lightly, so I think he's a star in the making. And I think the receiving core is going to be just fine. I think we have the talent to be an explosive offense, as I said on Saturday, likes of Alabama last year and LSU the year before.
Yeah, I think that, first of all, I think that's a very interesting comparison, but I think that very quietly, Georgia has done a lot to upgrade its receiver talent these last few years, and it's more than just Pickens, who was the five-star. Bringing in Dominic Blaylock was a big deal. Blaylock, when he comes back from injury, he's already proven himself to be a capable receiver. What Georgia did for the 2020 cycle with guys like Jermaine Burton and Justin Robinson and Marcus Rosemy-Jacksain, that's a level of, talent haul that previous Kirby Smart signing classes probably didn't have at the receiver position. And then lo and behold, 2021, you're going to think of that as a little bit of a more quiet year for Georgia at the receiver spot. But now A.D. Mitchell looks like the kind of guy who's capable of playing for Georgia maybe right away there. I mean, I think that one of the untold stories over the course of the last recruiting cycles is pretty quietly Georgia has done a lot to upgrade its wide receiver talent. So this program, this unit in particular, can be more than just George Pickens. Now, listen, I'm a huge fan of George. I hope I get a chance to see him play again in the red and black, and maybe I will. But you've obviously got to have more than that, and it certainly seems like on the basis of Saturday and some of what we saw last year when George also wasn't playing, that Georgia does have more than just George right now.
Oh, exactly. But let's not forget, he is there's a reason we speak so highly of the kid. He is a ultra-talented kid. I mean, he makes Georgia better. So not having him is a big loss, but I just think the way that Georgia has recruited with the talent that they have behind him with Justin and Jermaine and Don once he comes back. And let me go ahead and put this notion on. I keep seeing that they list A.D. Mitch at 6'4". I'm just going to tell you he's not 6'4". I put him in more range of 6'2", in the 6'2" range, but he's not 6'4". But he is a talented kid that I've been raving about since I've watched his film, and I think a lot of the Georgia people didn't know much about him, so they was down on Georgia receiving crew this year in the 2020 class. But I think the two that we brought in are going to be very productive receivers when they get the opportunity to be.
Now, obviously, your opinion on Darnell Washington carries a lot of weight with me. But, Terrence, the way that I've been kind of saying it is when Darnell came in, he was obviously this unique specimen, right? You know, a big guy who ran that way. And one of the things I've been honest with on the show is I almost wondered if he was too much of a project to be utilized by Georgia in the 3 or 4 years he was going to be here. I could have certainly seen him going on to the NFL and finding great success there, but could Georgia get him ready fast enough to really take advantage of him? I think the answer to that right now looks like a resounding yes. Terrence, I really expect Darnell Washington to be a big part of Georgia's offensive plans this year. I think he's gone from being a project to now actually being a player. I think this is a guy that Georgia should utilize this year because he creates so many different mismatches. And I know we've kind of gotten excited about guys like this before, and sometimes it doesn't come to fruition. In the case of Washington, knowing he's got an offensive coordinator who likes to throw to tight ends, he's got a quarterback who's capable of finding him. Frankly, Terrence, I just don't see how this doesn't work together to add to something good for Washington here this season.
Oh, I think so. Just watching his film early on, and even early on last season, I just thought he was big and he was a big lumberer. I didn't think he moved well enough to be a really great tight end in the SEC. I thought he would be very good, but see him this at the end of the regular season, and especially in the spring game when on a telecast they say Coach Kirby say that he weighs 280. He moves extremely well. I was like, man, he may be a tackle one day. No, he is a legitimate tight end at 6'8", 280 if he weighs that much, and he moves so well to be that big, and he carries that weight very well. So I'm extremely excited about this kid. I don't think we had a tight end that I've been extremely excited about that this tall since Leonard Pope. And if he could bring that, level of talent and playmaking ability that Leonard did, we got a heck of a player on our hands.
Yeah, I think that the Leonard Pope comparison is actually a pretty interesting one because, first of all, Pope played in the NFL for a long time, but that was also a guy that was so big when he first got to Georgia that I was almost more, I guess, fixated on the size. I remember Mark Richt one time, I asked him about it in a press conference. He said, listen, I think that Leonard Pope's got a chance to be a pretty good playmaker there. And, sure enough, that's what kind of turned out to be true. And I think in the case of Washington, you're seeing some of the same kind of stuff in that, we get obsessed with the fact that he's so big. But in the Missouri game last year, we saw him run past people. In the Cincinnati game, we saw him make a would-be tackler miss in space. This is not a guy who has any kind of shortage of footwork or just the ability to kind of go out there and be an athlete. This is more than just a big guy.
Oh, exactly. And I'm a proponent of he's so big. We just got to get the ball in his hands, and he will fall for 10 yards and get us the first down because he's that big. And guys, especially in the secondary, is not going to want to tackle a 200 and whatever pound, 60 to 80 pound tight end who can move well in open space. Not going to want to tackle that guy. So he's definitely going to be a weapon. And if we utilize him correctly, I think the Georgia offense would be that much better.
So let me kind of, I guess, be fair and balanced here. If we're going to talk about some things that were good, there have also been some people on this show this week that have expressed some concerns about the state of the Georgia offensive line, not because it doesn't have potential, just because it's not settled right now. Terrence, what would you say about that in terms of the fact that you seem to have an open question about who's going to start at left tackle? There seems to be an open question about which spot Jamari Salyer is going to occupy. Does he have to go back outside? Can he stay inside, which I think what the thought was, to maybe begin the year here. Maybe Warren Erickson's emerged for now as the center. We'll see about that, but that's also, I guess, at least a little bit of an open question. What do you think about the state of the Georgia offensive line right now?
I think we're very talented. I think we're legitimately too deep at each position. That's a good thing. And for Jamari, I think Jamari is like that Swiss Army knife on the offensive line. He has played all 5 positions on the offensive line at some point in his Georgia career. So where the weak link is or the weak position, I think we can move Jamari there, especially at left tackle. If we have to move him back to left tackle, we saw last year that he held his own. I think Jamari's probably going to be a guard at the next level, so I would love to see him play left guard this season and have one of those young studs take over the left tackle position. But just to say it's an influx right now, I just think they're trying to get the best 5, move people around, and see that cohesiveness that the offensive line has to have to be one unit. I just think that right now they're just moving everyone around, just trying to find the best five, whoever that five is.
In the time we have left, I want to talk about a different subject, kind of off the radar a little bit, although I think it's about to be on the radar a whole lot more. And one of the reasons why I ask you about this, Terrence, is because you talk to so many young players each and every day. I'm curious of the opinions that are kind of out there. There's a story at DawgNation.com this morning about UGA partnering with a company to help educate players in relationship to the new name, image, likeness, laws, rules, whatever you want to call them. I guess in some cases it's going to be both laws and rules that are about to take shape here, where players have more of an opportunity to kind of cash in on the value that they bring to the table as an elite athlete. But Terrence, here's specifically the question that I have. When I look at the scenario, to me what I see is a lot of confusing lack of specifics about exactly what this new landscape is going to be like for players who play football, some of the future wide receivers that you kind of train there. And admittedly, some of this is probably related to the fact that we don't quite yet know what all these laws and rules are going to be. But I do think there's a scenario out there where we're kind of like dangling the keys of, hey, you can come to this school and you can cash in big and be making a whole bunch of money. But there's never really a lot of specifics about exactly how that's, I think, supposed to happen or likely to happen. Terrence, what are the guys that you speak to every day? What, if anything, do they say about, the ability to take advantage of their name, image, likeness, and kind of what they want to see from that world as college football seemingly in some form or fashion starts to make some changes?
It's crazy that I just had this, not going to name the receiver, but he just talked about this recently about opportunity to go into a certain school and being able to use this name and likeness to make money. And I just think back, I think it started back in my time when we could get a job in the summer, but you can only make a certain amount of money. We always didn't really understand why we get to be able to have a cap of how much money we can make, and everyone else can go and make as much money as they can. So there was a lot of uncertainty of what it is. But my biggest issue is you have a guy, I just put myself in this position. If I was coming out and played the way I played and I was able to make money off my name and likeness, it's the tax part of it. You're gonna have to get taxed on this money. And for someone who's 21 or under, I don't really understand that portion of economics. So they're definitely going to have to get educated on what they can and can't do, and the tax related to it, because you definitely don't want the IRS coming back to get you later on because you didn't submit how much money you made throughout your time at the university.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, Terrence. It's a interesting scenario that's going to take shape in the time to come, and frankly, I'm curious to see how it goes. I do think there's more to be done about just explaining how all of this is actually going to look for the players that were going to be a part of it. The programs themselves are certainly eager to make it sound like you can come to this school and really cash in, but nobody ever actually says exactly how they're supposed to be able to cash in and do that. Terrence, for the folks who want to get involved and be a part of some of the great training opportunities you provide, obviously doing so much great work with next generation receivers, pass catchers, how can folks find what you're doing?
I'm gonna give out before we do that. I got to give one shout. I see a lot of people once he signed at Georgia was making fun of him a lot. But one player that I saw that's gonna help us at some point, and I know I trained, but Ladd McConkey had a good G day, and I have to give Ladd some love that he had opportunity to catch punts, kick return, but he proved that he could be a legitimate receiver. May not ever be a star, but he will be a player that UGA will count on at some point in his career. And he's developed and got his body right to be a productive player, the special team, offense. I think Ladd is going to be a player. But if you could want to find me and do what Ladd did, came to me once his senior year was over to help him get ready to go to Georgia. He's an underdog. Find me on all social media. That's Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
So since you brought him up, let me just ask you about Ladd here real quick then. It seems like that's a kind of position that Georgia's been looking for someone to fill for a little while, that, slot-type receiver who can really make you miss in space, make you miss in a phone book, and, and that's sometimes not going to be a big guy, right? Because that's a guy that's going over the middle and using elusiveness. That's really the role that Georgia wants McConkey to occupy in the future. And like I said, they've had, I remember, transfer receivers, they've had guys before that they kind of hoped would be that guy, and I guess McConkey's the latest to sort of give that a shot, right?
I think so. I think Ladd could be our version of, what's the receiver that was at Hunter Renfrow?
Hunter Renfrow,
That
there
was
you
at
go.
Clemson for it. And I think Ladd could be that version of, he could take the pressure off the big-name receivers, and they just leave him matched up against a slot receiver. And now Hunter went from walk-on to now going into his third year in the NFL. I just think Ladd is going to be very productive, not call him a superstar or anything like that, but he's going to be a guy that once he get an opportunity, people are going to stop making fun of Ladd. And I, for one, believe he's going to be some type of role this season, especially next season. He will have a role on this offense.
Hey, that's great to hear, Terrence. Thanks for sharing that. I really appreciate that. It's always fun to get a chance to talk to you. Appreciate you being here.
No problem.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, listen, I really respect what Terrence Edwards has to say there about any kind of receiver, Ladd McConkey, anybody else. His opinion on that really matters, as we've joked about before. In the kind of velvet rope VIP club that is 1,000-yard receivers in the history of Georgia football, there's only one guy in there right now. It's kind of a lonely room at the moment. Terrence Edwards is the only one, but hopefully in the very future, in the very near future, somebody else is going to kind of get involved in some of that there as well. Let me also say this related to the name, image, likeness stuff. I know that I've kind of expressed my opinion that I'm kind of skeptical of all this kind of stuff. I guess here's maybe the better way for me to say some of this kind of stuff. Like, if a athlete's got 100,000 Instagram followers and wants to, cash in on that and do some, influencer posts, things like that. I mean, I really don't have a huge problem with that, person making, some money off of that. I guess the biggest issue I have is the idea that's commonly projected through media that this must take place because the college sports system is so broken. That's the part that I disagree with. When you really get out there in the world and speak to parents who are hoping their athletes get a chance to play Division I sports, football, baseball, basketball, across the board, you don't see a lot of people who view the system as broken. You see a lot of people who are hoping and begging and just praying that their son or daughter gets a chance to be a part of it. That's what the real world is. The 3% of the world that's on Twitter is all talking about how bad the system is, but the 97% of the rest of the world that kind of lives outside the boundaries of social media, they sort of view it in a little bit different light. So I guess that's where some of my skepticism related to some of this kind of comes from. By the way, speaking of great things going on right now as we get ready to head towards Mother's Day, let me give a shout out to my friends at Kroger, what they're doing with Kroger 5-Star Moms. This is going to be, I think, a really cool thing. Submissions are ongoing right now for folks getting a chance to get involved to nominate one of the moms in your life, your mother, your wife, whatever else. Nominate more than one if you want to. Great chance for you to do all of that. We all know so many 5-star moms who not just, watch Georgia football with us, but help get us to ball games and help just really keep us on track. Many of us, who knows where we'd be if it wasn't for the great influence of a terrific mom. And this is your way of saying thank you as we head towards Mother's Day. You go to DawgNation.com, find out more details on how to enter. But the email address to take advantage of here is info@DawgNation.com. Info@DawgNation.com. You can make a nomination there. We're going to honor 5 of these Kroger 5-Star moms as we head towards Mother's Day. We'll announce them right here on DawgNation Daily. And the gift pack that you get a chance to win includes a $50 Kroger gift card, a $50 Bath & Body Works gift card, and a $50 Home Chef gift card. So this is a pretty big deal in terms of what we're giving away for that. So please make sure you take advantage of that today. DawgNation.com for more details. Info@DawgNation.com, the email address to winner. To enter. Hopefully we get a chance to honor you or someone that you know as a Kroger 5-Star mom coming up. All right, we have a very interesting change to a story that we've covered now for a couple of days. We have talked about Joe Milton, the former Michigan quarterback, supposedly on his way to Tennessee. I believe it was Pete Thamel from Yahoo Sports that initially had the report that Milton was leaving to come to Knoxville. Couldn't officially, commit until later on, but was on his way to doing that. However, local media there in the state of Florida has caught up with Joe Milton, and he said that is not a thing that he's planning on doing right now. Now, he obviously, I guess, is still considering Tennessee, but it's Tennessee and Washington State. So Joe Milton, the former Michigan quarterback, for now at least, throwing some water on the idea that he's going to end up there at Tennessee, maybe considering Wazoo instead. Now, who knows if this is just a player who doesn't want to have his announcement spoiled. He's going to make the Tennessee announcement on his own time. But for now, Milton at least leaving the door open that his eventual transfer destination will be somewhere else other than Tennessee. This was a hot topic yesterday when we did SEC Country Live. Of course, don't forget SEC Country Live every Wednesday, 3 p.m. on the SEC Country video channels, SEC Country on Facebook, SEC Country on Live, Country Live on YouTube. We talked about a lot of that yesterday. Another story that I think is kind of interesting that I wanted to get to here for a moment. Ross Dellinger from Sports Illustrated had this. The Football Oversight Committee has met and made some suggestions about more changes coming to football in terms of whether the practices are administered. It means kind of the end of the Oklahoma drill, the sort of small circles, short contact, heavy duty, helmet on helmet, pad on pad type stuff, limiting that, further reducing the number of padded practices leading into the start of the season. All of this being done in an effort to make the game of football safer. The Football Oversight Committee kind of coming together on some of that kind of stuff. My guess is this probably doesn't impact schools in the SEC quite as much because most of these SEC schools are just at the forefront on like sports science and things along those lines, and their technological expertise, scientific expertise in relationship to some of this kind of stuff is part of what they use for their recruiting pitch. This is the kind of thing that matters to parents, that healthy and safe players, as you would imagine, is important to players. So for the most part, schools like Georgia and most of the other resourced programs in the SEC, you got to think they're kind of already kind of on the forefront of some of this as it is. It may matter for other programs. Now, there's also the flip side of this. And here on the show, obviously, we have great respect for the need to keep players healthy and safe. Who wouldn't want to do that? But as Kirby Smart said the other day in relationship to spring practice, the thing that you got to figure out in these modern times is how do you still become a good tackling team when you are tackling less in practice than you've ever been before? That's not Kirby Smart complaining about that rule. He said at the time that he understood why you're tackling less in practice. You want to keep players healthy and safe, but you also still want to be a good tackling team when you get into the actual games. And that's just one of the things that, coaches now have to navigate and deal with in a way that, they have not had to in the past. Becoming a good tackling team while tackling less in practice and having fewer of those padded practices to be able to do so. It seems like there are more of those kinds of changes on the way to college football. It'll be something for Georgia to navigate, but for the most part, my guess is Georgia's probably kind of already, at the forefront of some of that kind of stuff anyway. I was going to do an SEC through story on some of the spring games coming up on Saturday. There's another crop of those in the SEC. Let me just hold off on that for right now and instead go ahead and say that is your SEC through. I want to talk about this instead. Go to DawgNation.com today. Story of Hines Ward, the former Georgia wide receiver, who's going to take a job at Florida Atlantic. Now, Ward's been in the coaching ranks here for a little bit, was with the New York Jets. I think he was trying to get a job maybe with the Pittsburgh Steelers. But this is a guy that's, wanted to coach for a while and really putting his money where his mouth is, now going to a program like Florida Atlantic to try to, get some of those coaching chops and maybe be, who knows, a factor in college jobs at some point in time in the future. I mean, it reminds me of, it was back in 2016, I interviewed Hines Ward, and I went back and tried to find it today. It's really funny. I went back and listened to like an old DawgNation Daily episode from like 2016. I mean, first of all, it's amazing how long this show's now been on the air. We've been doing this for a good number of years, and this is back during the era in which there was no video. I was literally doing the show from my closet in my bedroom at the home that I lived in at the time. Kind of really weird to kind of go back and do some of that over again. But I was trying to find the audio of the Hines Ward interview that I'd done. This is back in a time in which we weren't putting all this on video. So I could not find the audio that I was looking for. I mean, even the story itself, I think, has now been kind of deleted off the internet. But I did find a story that I think linked to the quotes that I'd gotten from the interview when I had talked to Hines Ward about this way back in 2016. So I believe this is my interview, although I can't be 100% sure. But on the subject of coaching at Georgia, what Ward said way back in 2016 was, I'm dead serious. I want to coach at Georgia, he said. I've expressed that to Kirby Smart. I haven't had any talk with him about what all goes into it, but I think I've put it out there. I'm serious. I want to give back to my alma mater. He goes on to say, sometimes I get upset when it comes to recruiting. I see kids leave the state of Georgia during recruiting season to go play for another team. Now, if I walked in that room, meaning the living room of that player, there's no way that kind of that kid's leaving. the state of Georgia. He went on to say, timing is everything. Maybe down the road there'll be an opportunity for me to sometimes to do something I've always wanted to do, to coach back at the University of Georgia. That was Hines Ward. I believe that was my interview. I hope I'm not stealing somebody else's content, but I'm pretty sure back in 2016 that was my interview that I did with him where he said all of that. And at the time when Ward was saying these things, there was a lot of skepticism on the part of many people to say, well, he doesn't really know what goes all into coaching. He's got to work his way up the coaching ranks. Well, guess what? That's exactly what he's doing, spending some time with the Jets, now going to take a relatively low position at a relatively low Division I program like Florida Atlantic. And, who knows how this ends up if a guy like Ward ever arrives, at a place like Georgia. Frankly, it's very hard to get a coaching job at a place like Georgia, even if you were a great former player. Of course, North Carolina is using one of its alumnus in Dre Bly pretty well as new defensive backs coach there. So you do see former players kind of having a role. Miami's done some of this kind of stuff really well. But there's a high standard for what it takes to be a position coach at a place like Georgia. Ward in the past has said, this is something that I want to be able to do. A lot of folks in the media would say, well, if you want to be able to do this, you better be willing to work your way up the coaching ranks. Well, over the course of the last couple of years, that seems to be exactly what Hines Ward has been content to do. A very rich man who could just sit around and play golf all day if he wanted to. He's choosing to get involved at the lowest level of Division I sports, seemingly as a way of trying to work his way up the ranks. Honestly, I think it's kind of a cool story for a guy who says, hey, this is a dream of mine. I've accomplished a lot in my life. This is the next thing I want to accomplish, and he's kind of setting himself out to do that. I think that's a pretty good thing. So shout out to Hines Ward as he goes on a little bit of a journey here. I also think we can make a case for Hines Ward to get more Pro Football Hall of Fame consideration, but I guess that's a different conversation for a different day. Let's do this instead. Gator Hater Roll Call. We love wrapping up the show this way, and one of the ways we do that is by giving out our golden shoe. For those of you that show off your true Gator-hating credentials, I'll give you an example of this today from JT Daddy Daniels on Twitter. Kind of a cool JT Daniels-themed avatar there. So Dan Mullen put out a tweet about football camps, things like that. JT goes at him on Twitter saying, come on, Danny, the kids want to learn how to throw footballs, not shoes. So anybody who referenced the shoe throw from Marco Wilson, obviously going to go front of the line in terms of being considered for the golden shoe. So JT Daddy Daniels will make you the golden shoe winner for today. Speaking of them, those lousy stinking Gators, how about Gator Hater Countdown? 191 days from right now, Dogs get some revenge against Florida. We'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. The R.S. stands for Rapid Service. That means for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs, R.S. Andrews can show up on time, do the work that's promised, for the price it's promised. Find them online at rsandrews.com. We're in that kind of weird time of year where you're like running your AC some days, your heat the rest of the days. Other days, many of you last night probably got a little chilly. I know my family got a little chilly, so it's nice to have both those systems working the way they're supposed to work. So shout out to R.S. Andrews for making that all possible. And are you like me when it comes to Hines Ward? By the way, kind of going to join us here for a moment.
So one, Hines Ward is not a Hall of Famer in my book. I know he's a beloved Georgia fan, great, very good NFL player for the Steelers. Julian Edelman is not a Hall of Famer. Hines Ward is not a Hall of Famer.
But if Edelman gets consideration, you got to put Hines Ward in.
Fair, absolutely fair. Neither are Hall of Famers in my book. Two, based off what Terrence said, and I wrote a little bit about Darnell Washington this morning, so much of how we've talked about Darnell is also through the lens of Arik Gilbert.
Yeah.
Is this the first time you'd outright say you'd rather have Darnell Washington than Arik Gilbert on your team? In where you can only obviously have one of them.
That's a great question. I am at least comfortable saying I am very happy with the player that Georgia has. Now, I am a little bit of an Arik Gilbert homer in the fact that I still think he's a really good player. But I think you'd have to be really good to be better than Darnell Washington is right now. I've told you all this, and I've tried to be as candid as I can be. Darnell right now is a better player, Georgia, than I thought he was going to be. He was always an amazing-looking prospect, but sometimes – you see this in all sports. Sometimes that look doesn't translate. There's too much that has to be developed to take advantage of in the brief window of time while you're in college. But in the case of Darnell, it seems to be coming together pretty well here. So this is an example of the guy that Georgia got is working out, very well at the moment. It seems like very, very likely that Arik is going back to LSU. sounds like, I'm just obviously speculating here, but maybe his pathway towards eligibility is maybe better at the school where he doesn't have to transfer credits and things along those lines. And so we may get a chance to see a comparison between those two players again this year more so. But the guy that Georgia has worked out really well. Steve Highland says Dogs may have the number one tight end group in the nation. They're very deep there. This is actually a pretty good question. People say, do the players know who Hines Ward is? I mean, I would say that now in the case of Tony Grimes, obviously Dre Bly was from his hometown, so that's probably a little bit of a cheat on that. But, I mean, Dre Bly was instrumental in the recruitment of Tony Grimes, and, Bly was a player at UNC around the same time that Hines Ward was a player at Georgia. So I think this is one of those things where young players may not have seen Ward play the game, but it wasn't that long ago, and he's got Super Bowl ring, trophies, things along those lines, so he can show them some hardware, and I think that probably matters. Now, listen, I'm very happy with Cortez Hankton as Georgia's wide receivers coach. I'm not looking to push Hankton out the door. I just think it's kind of cool that someone like Hines Ward said, I want to do this. Like, my kids do this all the time. They're like, hey, I want to play the piano, but they just want to like magically start playing Chopin. Like, they don't actually want to practice the piano. Like, there are a lot of people in life who are like, hey, I want to be president, but they don't actually do anything to do so. In this case, Hines Ward, who does not have to do anything. I mean, Hines Ward could just be TV talking guy, right? I mean, he could just show up and celebrity golf tournaments and do a little TV work here and there and live off what I'm assuming was a pretty robust NFL salary. He could just do that if he wanted to. Instead, he's going to go work at Florida Atlantic. This is not glamorous work. I mean, I've had a lot of former NFL type players who've done the college thing. They're going to tell you right now that is work. He shows up at FAU or anywhere else he would choose to work, they're not going to treat him like, he's, prima donna just because he played a little bit in the National Football League. That's just not the way that, I mean, you got a job to do, and what you did prior to this job only helps you so much. Still got to do the sweat equity of building and helping that program. And I think for a lot of guys, it can be a little bit of a humbling experience, to be frank. I'm sure Deion's going through some of that at Jackson State after the initial glamour kind of wears off of, hey, this is prime time coaching college football. Eventually, you just become a coach like anybody else, and you just got to try to find a way to motivate players and win games and things like that. And it's not an easy job. So I just think it's kind of a cool thing that he's willing to submit himself into that world. I think it's a pretty cool thing. Aiden Cruz says, I'd rather have Darnell Washington than a Rick Gilbert right now. And it's a fair comparison. Matt Rugavina says, how about Darnell as a hybrid of both Leonard Pope and A.J. Green? Pete Williams said Hines Ward played some quarterback here too. Yeah, I'll put Hines Ward in the pound-for-pound conversation as one of the shortest list of best players to play at Georgia, if you understand where I'm coming from on this. In terms of all the different things that he did at Georgia, just being good at football, like Hines Ward was crazy good at football. He was obviously a great wide receiver, a capable quarterback. He beat Tech in 95, and did Georgia win the 95 Peach Bowl, or did they? I can't quite remember that. But he was a capable quarterback. He started at tailback against Alabama, a game that Georgia didn't win. He started at tailback against Alabama and rushed for 100 yards like this, and he was a terrific blocker. I mean, go back and see some of the blocks he did as a receiver at Georgia. He was laying absolute lumber. I mean, Hines Ward was just really good at football. Pound for pound, as good at the sport as anyone's been at UGA. What else? Tennille Calvino says the Queen is here. I like that from Tennille. David Harvey says if Jerome Bettis in the Hall of Fame, Hines deserves to be in the Hall of Fame there as well. Yeah, I mean, look, I think that here's what we kind of see across all sports. We're starting to expand the boundaries of who's a Hall of Famer. I mean, think about it in baseball. Now, I'm absolutely in favor of Dale Murphy's candidacy because I'm a total homer in this particular instance, but Murphy, I think, now has a lot of people vouching for his Hall of Fame candidacy in a way that a few years ago you just didn't get much of. We're just kind of expanding that. And I think the Pro Football Hall of Fame's got definitely – I think if any Hall of Fame has got room to kind of expand its horizons, for someone like Ward, chance to do that. plays for a legacy organization, Super Bowl MVP, really good playoff numbers. And that's one of the things you would look at is a guy who was really prolific in the playoffs. I could absolutely listen to a Hall of Fame conversation on Hines Ward, but admittedly, if we're talking about somebody that I don't have any kind of emotional tie to, I probably don't feel quite as strongly about it. Jermaine King says the players will see Hines Ward's Super Bowl ring. And yeah, that's kind of where it comes down to. And once again, I'm not saying that Ward is ever going to coach at Georgia or ever going to coach anywhere at this level. He may get bored with this and go decide to do something else. But, when you got the hardware, it becomes a little bit easier to remind folks who you are. Miriam Martin Corbin said she was the queen, but will relinquish that title to you. I do like the idea of Miriam Martin Corbin versus Danielle Calvino to determine the true queen of the Dog Nation Facebook comment section. I like the idea of that. Let's see what else. Lucy Bowers Boykin talking about keeping a list. Is this a list of golden shoe winners? It's one thing, admittedly, I'm not particularly good at. Probably. Xavier Kyle says he played more than a little bit in the NFL. Yeah, I said that a minute ago. But you understand what I mean. I meant that euphemistically. All right, let's see what else. Let me scroll through and get a few more of these Facebook comments. Steve Highland talking about drama surrounding Rick Gilbert. So I'm still going to defend him a little bit on that. I actually don't think the Gilbert situation is quite as dramatic as it kind of seems like it's going to be. And obviously I got no dog in that fight because he's not going to Georgia or anything like that. But I do think he's gotten a little bit of a bad rap. He chose a school, wasn't super happy there, tried to transfer, come to find out from an academic standpoint, it's probably easier that he just stays at the school that he was at. And that's essentially the sum total of all of this. Now, if he's made one mistake, I would say that he has made too many decisions on the basis of what was hot a year ago. And, in the stock market, the same way. If you invest your money, what the big money maker was a year ago, a lot of times you're going to be disappointed. He went to LSU the year after Joe Burrow and Joe Brady, went to try to go to Florida the year after Kyle Pitts. That's a little bit of a probably a trend and a decision process that's going to leave you disappointed over the long haul. But ultimately, I don't think that Gilbert has sought out drama. It's not like Rick is tweeting all the time. He really doesn't say much. So, people like me talk about him all the time, but he himself doesn't actually say very much. So I find the need to kind of defend him on some of that kind of stuff a little bit. I actually don't think he has sought as much drama as some people say that he has. Let me go over to YouTube here for a moment, and I'll come back to Facebook. I don't want to stay stuck on the same comment section too long. All right, over here on YouTube. Yeah, Thomas Tyson, I kind of agree with your take on that. Bill McConnell says Christy is the queen of YouTube, and I think that's probably true. I think that's probably true. If nothing else, I think Christy's probably the queen of YouTube. You're all queens in my eyes, the ladies anyway. All right, let's see a couple more here. Stephen Wainwright says, my question is, why aren't we playing Clemson in Atlanta? I think in this particular case, the Atlanta games were already booked. So, this was one of those deals where you either play the game in Charlotte or you don't play it at all. In other words, people are like, it'd be nice to play this home and home, or it'd be nice to, play it, in Atlanta instead of Charlotte. But, Charlotte was the one that really got the game together. And if it wasn't for their, what do you want to call it, ingenuity to even get the game scheduled, it just wouldn't even be played. So in this particular case, I think going to Charlotte's going to be not a long drive from Atlanta as it is. So it was really that sports council up there that was able to kind of get the game together. Jake Shipe says, I'll go 9 minutes on wrestling. I guess there's a chance I probably would. Luke Bird on the subject of wrestling. I tell you what, Luke, hit me up on Twitter at DawgNation Daily, and we'll chat about that. That sounds good. Hit me up on Twitter at DawgNation Daily. We'll talk some wrestling there. That sounds good. Let's see. Robert Barnes on the subject of Hines Ward beating them Gators too back in 1997. That was a big deal. He was big in that game. Big in that game for the Dogs. Let's see what else. Always nice to see folks kind of fighting in the YouTube comment section. A lot of YouTube it seems like there's a lot of comments today too. I always like to see Jay Grace, Bama Boy, going back and forth with people. Seems like we may have a new troll here today there too. Bank 6 says Clemson's defensive line is strong, but Georgia's offensive line practices against a strong defensive line there as well. They won't be overwhelmed by Clemson's defensive line. They'll be ready. You hope so, because I mean that's obviously the one biggest strength that Clemson has in that game, I think, and that's what certainly Clemson's going to be looking to lean on. I talked about inexperience of the Clemson offense start the show. You could certainly do the opposite conversation about a ton of experience there for that Clemson defense. You could definitely do that. Yeah, James M. Talking about the Rick Gilbert situation there too. String Gene says the NFL is like wrestling, and I'm always kind of amazed at how almost all of life is becoming more like pro wrestling. Like I used to grow up, and there's like this sort of like established kind of rules in pro wrestling for how things went, and over the course of time, it just seems like a lot of life now just sort of looks like pro wrestling. Let's do a couple more. William Perry says, don't I hope the national media keeps writing us off against Clemson? Yeah, I mean, it's always kind of nice, I guess, to be able to confound some expectations. Always nice to be able to do that. Stephen Wainwright says there's a lot of trolls in here. Yeah, there's always going to be. So Gordon makes an interesting comparison. He says if Steve Smith, former Carolina Panther and Baltimore Ravens, a Hall of Famer, then Hines Ward's definitely a Hall of Famer there too. Is Steve Smith going to get into the Hall of Fame, or is he in the Hall of Fame already? He's in the Hall of Fame now, right?
He is not. And Steve Smith is like a big reason. Like I firmly believe Steve Smith should be a Hall of Famer, and he had a better career statistically than Hines Ward did. And so because of that, until Steve Smith gets in the Hall of Fame, I believe Hines Ward should not be in the
Probably
Hall
better
of Fame.
playoff numbers for Ward, though, probably, right? I mean, Smith was look, Smith used to eviscerate the Falcons. I mean, the Falcons could not guard him. I'm thinking Ward may have the better playoff numbers there, but that's actually a really good comparison. Smith and Ward is a really good comparison. Henry Carter, good to see you in the Facebook comment section today. Chad Williams, getting a little greedy, saying, I don't just want to beat Clemson. I want to blow them out. Shelton Tucker bringing back the name James Jackson. So James Jackson was Georgia quarterback when I really started getting into college football. Like, I'm not old enough. Like, I was alive in 1980, but I'm not really old enough to remember, Herschel, Buck Bellew, John Lastinger, the early 80s teams. I was alive, but just not old enough. When I started going to games every single week, it was James Jackson who was Georgia quarterback, and it was his backup Wayne Johnson coming off the bench to beat Auburn in 1986. That was one of my first really big games. The Florida game in 85, I guess, would have been one that I remember, the 24-3 win when Florida was, I think, ranked number 1, I think. So that's around the era that I really kind of got into Georgia football, around 86 when James Jackson was the starting quarterback. So that's a big blast in the past right there, and he was a good running quarterback. Chad Williams says he believes he was from Columbus. He may have been. Eric DeVornsey says Hines may have been the best blocking receiver all time. He used to lay lumber. I mean, just absolutely just ear-holing guys. Absolutely ear-holing guys. For sure. Matt Rugavina says to tell the YouTubers. And by the way, there's been a lot of YouTube hate towards Matt Rugavina. He says that my title of Lord Regent. All the Georgia Vale. We have a stat update here.
So Hines Ward raw numbers are better than Steve Smith, but
Okay.
Steve Smith on a per game basis was better than Hines Ward was.
So
makes
Ward
sense.
played longer then, is that what you're saying?
Ward played 7 more games
Okay.
than Steve Smith did. He only had about 180 more receiving yards and 1 more touchdown in those 7 extra games.
Well, I'll take that as a W. I'll call that a W. It's a really interesting comparison, though, because I sort of think of Smith and Ward as slightly similar players. And I thought Steve Smith was a very good player, too. I really did. Philip Jordan Wells says he's the warden of the Facebook North and the West. I like that, too. Keith Volt says, I'm old enough to have seen all those guys you mentioned in person. I'm always glad to have guys like Keith as part of our comment section. We need some institutional memory around here. We need folks who saw the great era of Georgia football of the early 1980s. I mean, the way I kind of grew up was my grandfather played like the cassette tapes for me of like the Larry Munson stuff and things like that. And it was always so much fun to sit around and kind of hear those stories, what that was like. And it's one of the reasons why when Georgia won the SEC in 2002, it had been a 20-year drought. I mean, you hate to say it that way, but it had been a long drought, and it was kind of, my generation's chance to experience what, folks just a little bit older than me got a chance to remember. And then obviously, what Kirby was able to do in 2017. I mean, Georgia fans, it's kind of nice to go back and remember those memories and kind of, appreciate your own moments, kind of celebrate and enjoy that kind of stuff. A couple more here. Thomas Tyson says that Cody Ledoux is the YouTube jester. That's really funny. Frank Patterson says, I'm going to send a rave into the Facebook side, let them know, hashtag YouTube remembers. Very good from Frank. I love that. Very nice job. A little Game of Thrones reference there as well. All right, we're going to get ready to go. Robert Barnes says, at the time, I thought Wayne Johnson was the better quarterback. So honesty compels me to admit there was a quarterback controversy after the Wayne Johnson performance at Auburn and the hoses came on. And the thing I'm always amazed by, like, I sort of knew there was, but do you ever think about this? Like, how did we know that? Like, in 1986, how did we know that other Georgia fans thought Wayne Johnson should have started over James Jackson? There was no social media. In 1986, there wasn't even a ton of sports radio to speak of. I mean, there just was not a ton of media, and yet even as a child, I was sort of aware there was controversy related to who should start for Georgia at quarterback going into the Tech game to close out the season. And you ever wonder, how did things go viral back prior to social media? I mean, I lived through that age, but I still am not quite so sure how it was. Maybe it was Furman Bisher writing a column or something like that. I'm just not quite so sure, how we knew there was controversy. But even as a child, I think I was, third grade maybe in 1986, maybe third or fourth grade. Even I knew that there was a little bit of debate about who that starter should be. But, way, way ahead of internet, social media, and even, the kind of sports radio type chatter that would exist a few years after that, I'm just not quite so sure how those controversies were deliberated. I think it's kind of a fun thing to kind of go back and try to figure out how we were even aware what other people thought back then. But nonetheless, appreciate you being here as a part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down today. Speaking of the great legendary Furman Bisher, make sure you check out the Atlanta Journal-Constitution for everything going on in the world of sports. Braves got a win last night in New York. Hawks did not against the depleted Knicks, but nonetheless, that's ongoing. Getting ready for the draft here coming up, NFL draft. That is a lot of fun. We have a lot of big things going on here. Atlanta News Now, AJC.com. Also, more stuff related to, I guess, the fact that Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport no longer the world's busiest airport in 2020. Of course, pandemic-related probably has a huge impact on that. Trey Young, speaking of the Hawks, does sprain his ankle a little bit, although I think Trey's saying he's okay, but you can get the latest reports on that. Atlanta News Now at AJC.com there as well. So a lot of great stuff. Make sure you check that out online, AJC.com with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Thanks so much for being here as a part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. We will look forward to seeing you back here at 10 a.m. tomorrow as well for a DawgNation Daily presented by Meriwether and Tharp. Hope you will join us then. Don't forget to check out R.S. Andrews for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. Find them online at rsandrews.com. See you tomorrow, everybody. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.